Throughout the late 19th and into the 20th centuries, nations developed new naval technologies that led to the creation of ever larger ships. One of those types of ships was, of course, the battleship. Every naval power ranging from the United Kingdom to Japan was developing battleships. Even South American and Balkan nations were caught up in creating these colossal fighting machines. However, not every battleship created or idea developed was the best. In that same vein, already existing battleships in need of modernization might have problems. In today's video, we're going to look at some actually terrible battleships. Starting with a French battleship, as it seems to be tradition at this point, we'll look at the Brennus. With all that we've said about the Marine Nationale, they have produced some excellent vessels, especially in the 20th century. Looking at their large destroyers, starting with the Jaguar class, along with some of their cruisers. Of course, capital ships, the Richelieu class for example, were excellent battleships. It's just that a lot of their ships were unconventional and rather unique. Certainly in the late 19th century, and even in the 20th century, of which the uniqueness can be boiled down to several components, in my humble opinion of course. 1. The Tumblehome hulls. 2. Large superstructures. 3. Designs by committee/independence of different naval yards. And 4. What naval tactics/building programs were in vogue, such as the Jeune École or Young School starting in the late 1800s. At least for a majority of the ships we'll discuss in these videos. But those are just my thoughts as we delve into the Marine Nationale a bit more. There could be more or less, and if you agree or disagree or want to add to the list, please let me know down in the comments. In the late 1880s, battleship construction had been suspended and then resumed with the powers that be favoring the Jeune École fleet composition that focused on smaller craft, where to take from Stephen S. Roberts and French warships in the Age of Steam 1859 to 1914. During the 1880s and 1890s, all navies had to adjust to fundamental technological challenges, above all, the torpedo. In France, this adjustment involved heated polemics in the press and parliament by partisans of the Jeune École, literally young school, favoring torpedo boats as a replacement for the mastodontes, mastodon battleships, while much of the Navy and its civilian supporters defended battleships as the only lasting form of sea power. With this in mind, on January 7, 1886, Rear Admiral Abe, the leader of the Jeune École, whom advocated for building torpedo boats in place of battleships, became Minister of Marine. Now, he lasted until May of 1887, and for the sake of time, without delving too deep into it, battleship construction continued under a new minister. Along with that, in February 1887, with the renewal of the Triple Alliance between Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, there were calls for a stronger navy, and thus a rather ambitious naval building program that was to come to be in 1890, which included the building of battleships. One of the first ships thought of during this French naval expansion was the battleship Brennus, with new technologies in mind like the 37 and 47mm revolving Hotchkiss quick-firing guns and new large-caliber guns such as the model 1887 340mm gun, along with the adoption of new armor schemes, machinery, and other such improvements, as this was going to be the Marine Nationale's first real delve into what today we would term pre-dreadnoughts. With that being said, Abe had funded the construction of ironclads, these being Neptune, Magenta, and Brennus. Hopefully that last name is familiar. As mentioned previously, construction was stopped on battleships during his tenure, including these 3 ships. But when he was out of office, work was resumed on Neptune and Magenta, but not Brennus. Taking from Stephen S. Roberts again, on August 27, 1887, Minister of Marine Barbet transmitted to the port specifications for a battleship produced by the Council of Works on 26 July 1887, and asked them to submit designs. That is, the Council of Works requested the various yards to produce designs for a new battleship. He continues, on September 1, 1887, Lorient sent to the ministry a statement of the state of Brennus at the time work was stopped. In early October, Barbet asked Huon, the senior constructor at Lorient, if it would be possible to meet some of the August specifications while retaining the underwater portions of the hull, which had already been fabricated, and in some cases, laid on the building ways. Ulan reported to the maritime prefect on October 11th that it would be possible to modify the design for the suspended Brennus to satisfy nearly completed new specifications while using the work already done, and added that the yard needed the work as soon as possible. So basically, they were going to transform the already started Brennus, an ironclad ship, into something that we would call a pre-dreadnought. So yeah, it was going to be an interesting transformation to say the least. Throughout the coming months, Ulan's design changes were gone over by Paris. The naval constructor and Ulan debated over the main battery mostly. Ulan wanted Brennus to have 3 340mm guns, or for those who use the Imperial system, around 13.4 inches. The guns were to be in turrets, a twin turret forward and a single aft, originally using the same guns as Osh, another ship we'll cover eventually, as well as 10 164.7mm guns, of which 4 were in armored redoubts in the superstructure above the turrets. 6 were in the central citadel in the hull, and 1 military mast between the 2 funnels, with the conning tower at its base, having a 10,673-ton displacement and machinery for 12,538 indicated horsepower. The secondary battery was rearranged according to the naval constructor, putting the secondary battery in the central citadel with 4 barbette turrets on top, allowing for 4 to fire forward and 4 aft. Then the military masts were increased to 2. The placement of the conning tower forward of the funnels rather than between them, and an increase in power to 13,500 indicated horsepower, and Belleville boilers, increasing the bow by 3 meters and changing the armor of the turrets to 40 centimeters from 45 to reduce the weight. Not desiring to have stability issues, or so they thought, but a top speed of 17.5 knots instead of the 18 the August specifications wanted. Still, these December 1887 designs were within the limits of the specifications, adding 104 tons to the design, but they should be compensated for by the lengthening of the hull. The changes were officially adopted on December 31st, 1887, resuming the work on the ship while confirming the cancellation of another ship. The contractors for the main belt armor were approved on October 1st, 1889, which was for steel and not iron from the works we discussed in a previous Weird Ships video. Further contracts for the development of more steel continued until 1891 for different parts of the ship's armor, like the secondary battery for example. Another change that came was to the main battery, with the proposed 28.5 caliber 340mm Model 1884 guns designed for Brennus not being good enough, as there was a new 42 caliber 340mm Model 1887 gun with a higher initial velocity, and this was the gun that was going to be installed on the ship. Interestingly enough, her engines were the first triple expansion engines built at Indraut for a large ship, while more changes saw a 5th torpedo tube aft of the admiral's cabin on early plans, which was deleted before the completion in 1894, and a 6th bow tube between the hawser pipes was deleted even earlier. There was some thought in adding a small ram, but it was deleted as well because it would not have been strong enough to do anything. By December 1890, the secondary battery was changed to quick firing. I'm sure as you can tell, work on the ship was slow, dragging well into the 1890s. I need to quote Roberts again because I can't come up with words to better describe the following. On June 17, 1894, mind you, the ship had launched in 1891, the usual stability trials conducted upon completion of fitting out revealed a catastrophic lack of stability. With the turrets trained on the beam and the crew lined up on the rail, the ship heeled 28 degrees, and the casemate 164.7mm guns dipped below the water for half their length. She could not right herself because of the wide armor shelf now 20 centimeters below the waterline. The ship moved from Lorient to Brest and began trials in this condition, but the trials were soon suspended. It's safe to say the changes to the original design had caused some stability issues. Adding 100 plus tons was not compensated for by lengthening the hull. Taking from Ruggiero Staglini and Michel Constantino in the French fleet, Ships, Strategy and Operations 1870 to 1918, they write about the situation. When Brennus was inclined in 1894, the combined weight of report guns and 750 men positioned at the side caused the ship to have a 28-degree heel, with the muzzles of the 165mm guns plunging below the waterline. It was therefore decided to replace the aft military mast with a 33-meter tall pole mast, install an external cofferdam at waterline level, remove the side covers of the funnels, and 5 service boats to lighten the steel superstructure used for moving the service boats, and to add some armor plates at the upper edge of the belt. All of this work was completed by late 1894. It was aimed at increasing the metacentric height, and inclining experiments carried out in August 1895 proved satisfactory. Further machinery trials proved that she could reach a top speed of 17.1 knots, not the 17.5 knots that was anticipated. I'll post a picture of the particulars because there's a lot to cover with this ship. For the most part, people don't seem to be interested in me yapping about them, so I'll leave them up on screen so you can more easily pause the video if you're interested. Throughout the coming years of service, Brennus needed various upgrades and changes to the ship to fit the ever-changing modern naval world, including having a wireless system installed in 1900, in addition to the pole masts. However, as the early 1900s went on, she was sent to the reserves as more modern battleships entered service, being assigned to training duties in 1908 and eventually struck from the Naval Register in 1919. Staglini and Constantino have this to say about Brennus, and I think it's a pretty apt way to end. Although plagued by poor stability, Brennus formed the basis for the subsequent group of 5 broadly similar battleships built to the same design specifications and included in the French 1890 naval program. That, of course, is the fleet of samples, something we have discussed in previous videos, link in the description. Like the French, another nation that often gets brought up in these videos are the Russians/Soviets, and today we have the Russian pre-dreadnoughts of the Borodino-class, of which you might be able to see some similarities to the French battleships we have discussed previously. The ships of the class were Borodino, Imperator Alexander III, Suvorov, Orel, and Slava. The Borodino-class was broadly designed along similar lines to the previous Tsarevich, which the French helped to design and build, where to take from Stephen McLaughlin in Russian and Soviet battleships. These 5 ships constitute the largest class of seagoing battleships ever constructed by the Imperial Russian Navy. The contract for the French-built Tsarevich included the condition that drawings would be provided for building of similar ships in Russian shipyards. Despite this provision, however, the design of the Russian-built ships turned out to be far different from the French prototype. Almost immediately following the signing of the contract, it became clear that building duplicates of the French ship would be impossible. The first problem was a matter of timing, as Russian yards were begging for new work, but so far, only a sketch design existed, and it would take several months to develop working drawings. Also, the chief inspector of shipping pointed out that Russian machinery would be heavier and Russian turrets of larger dimensions than their French equivalents. Therefore, in July 1898, the naval constructor was ordered to figure out a way to rework the French design, keeping the same speed, draft, artillery, armor, and a supply of fuel for 5,500 miles in mind. To accomplish this, the General Naval Staff allowed him for an increase in displacement. The first design came about a month later, being 13,225 tons as opposed to the 12,900 tons of the French design, and the machinery increased to 16,600 indicated horsepower. He also replaced the midship 6-inch turrets on either beam with a pair of casemate-mounted guns, something that some in the General Naval Staff didn't like, but agreed that the design warranted further work. Months passed without the General Naval Staff caring about the design. I guess you get busy with other things. But in December, Admiral Tirtov reminded the General Naval Staff that the launch of the Oslabia would soon free up a slipway. Therefore, the Admiralty ordered a ship to the naval constructor's design to be laid down. But by the time the General Naval Staff had gotten around to this, the Baltic Works, a Russian shipbuilding company, had entered the fray with 3 variations to the French design, these being larger, longer, and having finer lines than their French counterparts, much like the naval constructor's design. Over the coming months, the Naval General Staff would debate and revise the requirements for the design. Still, in April, they finally accepted the naval constructor's design for the battleship, which made accommodations for 75mm anti-torpedo boat guns. The General Admiral approved the design and the construction of 3 ships, with 2 more that could not be laid down currently. These last 2 being ordered in April 1900, with 3 being built by the Baltic Works. McLaughlin writes, "The construction of so many large ships at the same time forced the Naval Ministry to order some components from abroad. Some of the steel castings for the Borodino and Imperator Alexander III were ordered from Skoda Works in Austria-Hungary, and the Krupp armor for the latter was ordered from the United States. There were also some changes to the design, the most significant of which affected the deck protection. The Baltic Works proposed a change in its form. Instead of curving downward through 90 degrees to form the anti-torpedo bulkheads, as in the Zarevich, the Baltic Works wanted to substitute conventional deck slopes with the anti-torpedo bulkheads connected to the deck. This change was carried out in all ships except the Borodino and Alexander III, which were far too advanced in their construction to include this alteration. Other changes after the start of the building included the elimination of the above-water broadside torpedo tubes, an alteration to the form of the stern, and the installation of steam heating, along with some other minor changes. It was clear way before the ships were complete that they were going to be overweight, and this led to further design changes. The main belt was further reduced in thickness from 8 inches to 7.64 inches. Admiral Makarov advocated for the elimination of the anti-torpedo bulkheads since recent French experiments had shown them to be ineffective, but this idea was rejected. The Orel had some special problems during her completion. When arriving at Kronstadt in May 1904, where she prepared for the mounting of her armor, which included the removal of some temporary sheeting, which inadvertently allowed water to enter the port side of the hull, and the ship took on a list of 24 degrees. Counterflooding reduced it to 15 degrees, but by this time, she had grounded on the harbor bottom. She had to be pumped out and refloated before work could resume. The outbreak of war with Japan led to an acceleration of fitting out work. The Borodino and Suvorov never ran official machinery trials, while the Orel never conducted her gunnery trials. As for Slava, she was going east as part of a reinforcement squadron, but by that time, the disaster at Tsushima had already taken place. Like our French portion of the video today, I'll put up a picture for your viewing pleasure for the particulars of the class, as there's a lot to cover, so if you'd like to read more about it, feel free to pause the video and read to your heart's content. Well, as it were, you clicked on this video to find out why these ships were bad, and we've covered it somewhat, but we've come to the point in the video where we get to the meat of the issue. The ships were 4 to 5% overweight when they were completed, well within the norms of Russian shipbuilding for the time. But the overload brought the low-lying gun ports for the amidship 75mm battery even closer to the water, where during Imperator Alexander III's trials in October 1903, the ship made a high-speed turn to port, and as she turned, the ship began to take on water from the 75mm gun embrasures. McLaughlin writes, "The overweight condition of the ships at normal load displacement did not affect their stability unduly. Instead of the design figure of 4.13 feet, 1.26 meters at normal displacement of 13,516 tons, the Borodino at 14,091 tons had a metacentric height of 3.74 feet, 1.14 meters, while the Imperator Alexander III at normal load displacement of 14,181 tons had a metacentric height of 4 feet, 1.22 meters. But as loaded for their voyage to the Far East, the stability of the ships was generally reduced. The Borodino sailed from Naval at about 15,275 tons due to extra ammunition and coal. This brought her draft to more than 29 feet, 8.9 meters, submerging her main armor belt completely and reducing her metacentric height to 2.5 feet or 0.76 meters. The ships were especially heavy laden when they departed Madagascar for the long voyage across the Indian Ocean, probably reaching 16,800 tons. At Tsushima, it's believed that the ships were about 1,700 tons above their design normal displacement. That was not great for combat effectiveness. Still, this can be seen as not necessarily a design fault, but a fault of the Russian Navy for overloading their ships. However, coupled with the facts mentioned earlier, due to the low-lying gun batteries, it made for a bad combination at Tsushima, with only Slava surviving long enough to actually receive any major modifications. Regardless of any of the bad design flaws we usually discuss in these videos, stability issues in particular, this class's performance at the Battle of Tsushima should speak for itself, not exactly coating themselves with glory. The ships on the list just scratch the surface of terrible battleships. Hopefully you found this look at possibly terrible or odd battleships interesting. I always love looking at battleships, and I think this is a good way for me to do so. Anyway, please remember to like and subscribe, as it'll help the channel to grow. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, my friends, have a great week.